Emma Rodriguez had always felt like she lived in the shadow of an ordinary man. Her father, Michael Rodriguez, had been a quiet maintenance worker at the city hospital for as long as she could remember. He fixed broken pipes, replaced flickering light bulbs, and came home each evening with dirt under his fingernails and exhaustion in his eyes. When he passed away 3 months ago from a sudden heart attack, Emma thought she knew everything there was to know about the man who had raised her with such gentle patience. The old Victorian house on Maple Street had been in their family for decades. Emma's grandmother had left it to her father, and now it was hers. She'd been putting off the difficult task of going through his belongings. But the estate lawyer had been calling, and decisions needed to be made. The house would have to be sold, but first she had to face the memories trapped within its walls. Emma pushed open the heavy wooden door to the attic, and dust motes danced in the afternoon sunlight streaming through a small, grimy window. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and forgotten time. Cardboard boxes were stacked everywhere, labeled in her father's careful handwriting. Tools, books, Emma's school papers, Christmas decorations. Each box told a story of a life lived quietly, without fanfare. She began methodically, opening each container and sorting through the contents. There were his old work uniforms, still smelling faintly of industrial soap, a collection of mystery novels, their pages yellowed with age, report cards from her elementary school years, each one carefully preserved. Her father had kept everything, as if he knew that someday these ordinary objects would be all that remained of their shared history. In the corner, behind a stack of photo albums, Emma noticed something that didn't fit with the rest. It was a small wooden box, about the size of a jewelry case, but heavier. The wood was dark mahogany, polished smooth by years of handling. There was no label, no indication of what it might contain. When she tried to open it, she discovered it was locked. Emma searched through the other boxes, looking for a key, but found nothing. The curiosity was eating at her. Why would her father, who had never been secretive about anything, have a locked box hidden in the attic? She found a screwdriver in his toolkit and carefully pried at the lock. After several minutes of gentle pressure, the mechanism gave way with a soft click. Inside the box, nestled in faded blue velvet, were 3 items that made Emma's breath catch in her throat. The first was a police badge, its metal surface tarnished with age, but still bearing the insignia of the Metropolitan Police Department. The second was a black and white photograph of a man in a police uniform. The face was younger, but unmistakably her father's. The third item was a sealed envelope, yellowed with time, with words written in her father's familiar handwriting. "Only open if you ever doubt who I was." Emma's hands trembled as she held the envelope. Her father had never been a police officer. He had worked at the hospital for 30 years, ever since she could remember. There had to be some mistake. Maybe the badge belonged to a friend, or perhaps it was some kind of costume piece. But the photograph was definitely her father. She carefully opened the envelope, trying not to tear the aged paper. Inside was a letter, written in her father's precise script. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you found the one secret I've carried for your entire life. I hope you can forgive me for keeping it from you, but I want you to understand that everything I did was to protect you and your mother. I wasn't always a maintenance worker. For 17 years, I was Detective Michael Rodriguez, Metropolitan Police Department. I worked undercover operations, primarily focusing on organized crime and human trafficking. It was dangerous work, but I believed in it. I believed that someone had to stand between the innocent and those who would prey upon them. In 1998, I was assigned to infiltrate a child trafficking ring that had been operating in the city for years. The investigation took 8 months. I lived as someone else, built relationships with criminals, and slowly gathered evidence. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, pretending to be someone I wasn't, being surrounded by people who trafficked in human misery. But we succeeded. On a cold night in November, we rescued 13 children from a warehouse on the south side. One of them was a boy named David, only 7 years old. He'd been missing for 3 months, and his parents had given up hope of ever seeing him again. When we found him, he was so frightened he couldn't speak. I carried him out of that warehouse myself, and I'll never forget the moment when we reunited him with his family. However, during the operation, my cover was blown. The trafficking network was larger than we'd realized, with connections to organized crime families across the country. Death threats started coming immediately, not just against me, but against you and your mother. You were only 5 years old at the time, Emma. I couldn't bear the thought of you growing up in fear, looking over your shoulder, wondering if someone might hurt you because of my work. The department offered witness protection, but that would have meant uprooting our entire lives, changing our names, moving far away from everything we knew. Your mother was pregnant with what would have been your little brother, though we lost him early in the pregnancy. She was fragile, and I couldn't put her through the stress of a new identity. So I made a choice. I arranged for a new identity for myself. Michael Rodriguez, the police detective, died in a car accident, according to official records. I became Michael Rodriguez, the maintenance worker, a man with no past in law enforcement, no connections to organized crime investigations. It was the only way to keep you and your mother safe. I never regretted that choice, Emma. Not for a single day. Watching you grow up, seeing you graduate from college, walking you down the aisle at your wedding, those were the greatest victories of my life. You became a teacher, someone who protects and nurtures children in her own way. I'm so proud of the woman you've become. I kept the badge and the photograph to remind myself of who I used to be, but more importantly, to remember why I gave it up. Every morning when I went to work at the hospital, I wasn't just fixing pipes and changing light bulbs. I was still protecting my family, just in a different way. The trafficking ring was dismantled completely. The man who ran it died in prison 5 years later. The threats against our family ended long ago, but by then, I had built a life as a maintenance worker. I had friends, purpose, and most importantly, I had you and your mother safe and happy. Or say, I hope you understand that I never stopped being the man who became a police officer to protect people. I just found a different way to do it. Every quiet evening we spent together, every bedtime story I read to you, every time I helped you with your homework, that was me protecting what mattered most. I love you more than you'll ever know, and I hope that someday you'll be able to forgive me for keeping this secret. Your father, always, Michael Rodriguez. Emma sat on the dusty attic floor, tears streaming down her face. The letter shook in her hands as she read it again, trying to process the magnitude of what her father had sacrificed. He had given up his career, his identity, his recognition as a hero, all to keep her and her mother safe. The quiet man she had known, the one who had seemed so ordinary, had been extraordinary in ways she never could have imagined. She looked again at the photograph of her father in his police uniform. His face was younger, more serious, but his eyes held the same kindness she remembered. He had been a hero who chose anonymity, a protector who found his greatest victory not in accolades or recognition, but in the simple fact that his family was safe. Emma thought about all the times she had wished her father was more exciting, more accomplished. She had friends whose fathers were doctors, lawyers, successful businessmen. She had sometimes felt embarrassed when people asked what her father did for a living. Now she understood that he had been the most accomplished man she had ever known, and she had been too blind to see it. The next morning, Emma drove to the Metropolitan Police Department. She asked to speak with someone in records, and after explaining her situation, she was directed to Captain Sarah Martinez, a woman in her 50s who had been with the department for decades. "Rodriguez," Captain Martinez said, her eyes lighting up with recognition. "I remember him. He was one of the best undercover officers we ever had. When he died in that car accident—" "Wait, you said he was your father?" Emma explained the situation, showing the letter and the badge. Captain Martinez read the letter carefully, her expression growing more somber with each paragraph. "He wasn't supposed to do this," she said quietly. "We had protocols, procedures for officer protection. He was supposed to come to us." "He did what he thought was best for his family," Emma replied. "He made his choice." Captain Martinez nodded slowly. "He saved a lot of lives, your father. That trafficking operation he brought down, it was one of the biggest successes in the department's history. 13 children went home to their families because of his work." "There's something I'd like to do," Emma said. "I want people to know who he really was." A week later, Emma stood in front of the police memorial wall in the lobby of the Metropolitan Police Department. Captain Martinez had arranged for a small ceremony, attended by a few officers who had worked with her father years ago. They shared stories of his dedication, his courage, and his unwavering commitment to protecting the innocent. Emma held her father's badge and the photograph from the wooden box. With trembling hands, she placed them in a small display case that would become part of the memorial. A brass plaque read, "Detective Michael Rodriguez, 1965 to 2023. He served in silence, protected in secret, and loved without reservation." As the small group dispersed, Emma remained alone with the memorial. She pressed her hand against the glass case containing her father's badge and whispered, "You were more than I ever knew, Dad. You were more than anyone knew, and I'm proud to be your daughter." Outside, the city bustled with its usual energy. Somewhere in that crowd, there was a man named David, now in his 30s, who owed his life to the quiet maintenance worker who had once been Detective Michael Rodriguez. There were 12 other people, grown now, living their lives because of a man who had chosen to remain anonymous. Emma realized that her father's greatest achievement wasn't the badge or the recognition he had given up. It was the choice he had made every single day to be present, to be loving, to be the father she needed him to be. He had been a hero, not because he wore a badge, but because he had loved her enough to give up everything that made him feel heroic. As she walked back to her car, Emma made a decision. She would keep the house on Maple Street. She would turn it into a home for children in need, a place where kids who had been lost could find safety and healing. It would be a living memorial to her father's true legacy, not the cases he had solved or the criminals he had caught, but the simple, powerful act of protecting the innocent. The wooden box would stay in the attics, but it would no longer hold secrets. It would hold memories of a man who had understood that the greatest heroism often goes unrecognized, that the most important victories are the quiet ones, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose love over glory. Emma Rodriguez had spent her entire life thinking she was the daughter of an ordinary man. Now she knew the truth. She was the daughter of a hero who had loved her enough to let her believe he was ordinary. And that, she realized, was the most extraordinary gift of all.